Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Power Parsha Pearls. I find it especially interesting how this portion seems to be predominantly about death. The highlights of the portion are the death of Jacob after 147 years, and thereafter the death of Joseph. And though not detailed in the portion, pretty much all of the tribes effectively died during this period as well. And yet, the very name of the portion is VAYECHI, which means, and he lived. Jacob reaches towards the end of his life, and he summons all of his children around him to say goodbye. He blesses them each individually, and then he makes Joseph undertake an oath that he, Joseph, will ensure that his father Jacob is buried in the land of Israel. And subsequent to that, a lot of negotiation takes place as the Egyptians don't want to let Jacob go. They feel that he obviously brought tremendous good luck to the country, etc. He brought fortune to the land, but Joseph is adamant his father received the right burial, and ultimately he prevails. It was the most illustrious funeral procession, quite possibly ever in human history. It takes place as Pharaoh himself escorts the body, even as other kings also then see this and place their very crowns on top of the coffin as it passes through their lands. And later, after they return to Egypt, Joseph insists that his brothers undertake a similar oath to ensure that he too will ultimately be brought for burial in Israel. Only in this instance, the Jews were already slipping into their slavery, into their exile in Egypt, and his coffin, a metal box, was taken and sunk to the bottom of the Nile with the intent to ensure that it remains there, in the belief that it would add greater blessing to the land. Let's remember the Nile itself is what irrigated the land. The Nile itself was worshipped by the Egyptians. Joseph is the one who saved the economy. And so as far as they're concerned, let's keep Joseph's body here. It wasn't for over 2 more centuries before Moses would busy himself with retrieving that coffin from the river just prior to the Exodus, in keeping with that old original oath. Today, sadly, tragically, these very greats who insisted at the highest levels that they be buried in Israel can hardly be visited by their descendants now in the way that we look to visit our loved ones at auspicious times. Access to the cave of Machpelah in the city of Hebron is always fraught with some difficulty. You have to turn up in an armored bus, and the cave of Joseph in Shechem is virtually inaccessible altogether. But what is with this insistence of burial in Israel? Granted, they don't want their bodies to remain in Egypt, whether because it's not the sort of place any Jew would want to be buried, or more because they knew those very sites would become shrines if they were left there. But does it really matter what sort of burial one receives? Indeed, why is there so much emphasis put on the rituals involved with burial? I'd like you to consider the following story that emerged a little while back in Israel. A father and his son endured the depths of hell in Auschwitz. And it was there where they became separated, the father confined to a certain section, the child taken away to certain death. After liberation, the father went in search of his beloved child. His wife and other family he had seen slaughtered before her eyes were lost. But try as he may for the next year, he turned up nothing. He couldn't find his son. In his frustration and despair, he summoned the monies to make his way to South America, where he just simply turned his back on religion and his God. And let's be sure, who are we to ever judge a man in that sort of situation? He married a woman from South America. He fathered a child whom he doted on over the years, and he built up a phenomenally successful business. 60 years later, about 7, 8 years ago now, as he lay on his deathbed, he summoned his son. He looked him straight in the eyes and he told him, "My $10 million, well, I will leave to you, but not entirely. What you don't know is that I am really a Jew. I suffered in the hell of war. There was a son, my boy, that I haven't seen ever since. I want you to look for him. If he's out there, I want you to find him. And I want you to give him half of my wealth. 5 million for you, 5 million for him. Find him before I die if you can. Otherwise, tell him the truth about me either way." And this son, so overwhelmed by his father's sudden confession, employed all means of modern technology that had been previously inaccessible to his father. And he did trace someone of a similar background to Israel. And he made his own way there personally, and the shock horror of the man living in Israel with his wife and a large family. Wow, my father is still alive. The son calls to his father in Brazil to tell him of the wonderful news and that they were flying back together to see him. Only by the time they arrived, sadly, the father had passed away. I can only assume that the inner peace that evaded him for so long throughout all his years had now been found. And so, VAYECHI, he lived. He found that serenity. And like Jacob, as he was revived, he smiled and he went to sleep. But the story doesn't end there. All arrangements were made to have the old man cremated. It was his personal request, as stipulated in his will. The newfound Israeli son contested this in the strongest possible way. He's a religious man himself, to no avail. The Brazilian wife and son are adamant, and no amount of religious persuasion was going to change their secular minds. To us, he wasn't a Jew, much as like we are not Jewish. That's what they insisted. And besides, this was his dying wish. We have to honor it. The Jewish son is arguing passionately. He's contesting passionately. And when he sees that he's getting nowhere, he offered half of his new fortune, £2.5 million, to the other son to reconsider, to no avail. The matter was going to be fast-tracked before a judge who would decide, and it was pretty obvious there's little chance in a liberal land to have a judge rule in favor of a long-lost son, especially where it goes against the will of the deceased. And so, in a last-ditch attempt, the Jewish son turns to his now newly discovered half-brother and his mother, or not his mother, his father's wife, and says simply, keep it. Keep all the money. Let all your father's fortune be yours. I never had this money, and life was just fine without it. Just let me have him to take him for burial in Israel. And well, for some, money talks louder than principles, and they acquiesced. Even as he was later laid to rest in Israel with several rabbis in attendance to talk about the lost Jew who was finally coming home, the son had made them aware of the circumstances that led to this ultimate burial, allowing for them, as per their request, to let the story be known, even if only to highlight the many morals that can be derived from that story. But of course, at the same time, to protect the anonymity of the names of the individuals involved. $5 million for a Jewish burial. It's got to be one of the most expensive of all time. Why? What drives a person to such, dare we say, madness? Other religions might believe that the soul is all that counts and the body doesn't matter. But our religion doesn't say that. Certain secularists might maintain that a lifeless body is just a collection of chemicals that no longer works. But our religion doesn't say that either. Our religion says that which is holy was holy, is holy, and always remains holy. And therefore, it must be treated with the greatest of respect. Our religion says that inasmuch as the body was animated with the soul, then the body itself assumes great sanctity. And even as now the soul has departed, the body was, thus is, and always will remain holy. Our religion says that no human being should ever be abandoned, neither in life nor in death, because that which was holy is holy and always remains holy. Other religions might be ready and willing to reduce the body to ashes and nothingness. Our religion says that everyone should be attributed a sacred burial through the holy dedication of what is known as the Chevra Kadisha, because that which was, is, and always remains holy. Again, a human being that was animated with the soul retains that holiness always. The human being, once productive in its service of his or her maker, will yet again return to that same maker. They'll return to a place where they will continue in that ultimate purpose. So it doesn't all end here. Most of society will say, you can't put a price on life. Judaism says, you can't put a price even on death, not even $5 million. That's why it was so important to Yaakov and later on to Yosef to ensure that they be buried in the land of Israel. That's why it was so important to the long-lost son of a Jewish Holocaust survivor that his father be laid to rest in the land of Israel. And there's one other point to consider in all this. There's a very curious statement by our sages when they say, our patriarch Jacob never died. How can you make that claim when there were many who witnessed evidence to the contrary? They embalmed him, they buried him, they mourned for him. And the answer is this. Life's pleasures are many and varied, but they can be divided essentially into two general categories. the satisfaction of a personal need or desire, or the achievement of a certain impact on the lives of other people. The first category offers many gratifying moments, but nothing can equal the fulfillment that comes when you make a difference in other people's lives, when the world becomes different, better, smarter, holier because of something that you've done. The first category ceases with the interruption of physical life. Once you passed on, there were no more strolls in the park. But in the second category, when you've made a difference in other people's lives, your impact on the world continues. If you've taught something to someone else, that person is not teaching it to someone else. If you acted kindly to someone, that person still feels good about it, is a better person for it, and is acting more kindly to yet others. If you made the world a better place, that improvement is now being built upon to make the world an even better place. Hence, the Mishnah tells us there are any number of regal bearings that one can aspire to in life, but it is the crown of a good name which surpasses them all. You see, other regal bearings that you can aspire to, they're kind of bestowed upon you. Royalty, priesthood, whatever. The good name, that's something you achieve for yourself. And when you achieve that name for yourself, and even after you're gone, it's still every bit there. Your impact lingers eternal. And to add to that, there are two immediate expressions that spring to mind when we might describe benefiting your surrounds. The first is the general term for acts of loving kindness, which in Hebrew is gimilut chasadim. Note how it's always in the plural. Every time somebody performs a single act of kindness, at least two people are benefiting. The receiver, of course, but no less also the giver. And the other is the Hebrew word for giving, which is natan, spelt in Hebrew, nun taf nun, read the same way forward and backward, a palindrome. And the significance of this is that in giving, you might think you're doing the other person a favor, but really you're doing yourself a favor, because we actually receive more than we give, not only a slice of heaven in some faraway paradise, but even in the here and now. And not just because offering a generosity is reciprocated, but mostly because what you do for yourself leaves when you leave. What you do for others in the world, again, that remains, and that is eternal. So does life as we know it extend beyond the here and now? Well, that depends. If life is getting the most you can of its resources for yourself, you have a limited time in which you can get as much as you can, and then it's over. If life is about making a difference in the lives of others, then, like Jacob, you're going to live forever. And the bottom line message of our Torah portion, therefore, is this: your life is sacred. Everything you do has eternal value. You are holy and will always remain holy. Hence, the name of the portion, VAYECHI. Live your life in awareness of this, so that it can always be said about each of us, even after we're gone, and he truly lived. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom.